So, welcome, Guy. We're talking to Guy Benson, who is a national radio show host here at Fox News. And so what we're going to be talking about with Guy are a number of issues. As you know, this is the CEO's podcast on diversity and inclusion. So Guy is well known. First, we're going to ask him a bit about his background. At a very young age, he's had incredible success in media. We're going to talk to him about his background. We're going to talk to him about the fact that he's considered a gay Christian conservative who has a media presence at Fox. And so all of those are very interesting from our point of view in our technology business. So Guy, first what we'd like to know is if you could give us some of your background and how you've been able to have such tremendous success right out of university.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate that's very kind of you to say. My background, I'll try to make this as brief as possible. I was born and raised overseas as a young kid. I moved to the U.S., the New York area, permanently around 4th grade, and I was there through high school. Then I went to Northwestern University in Chicago, where I was a major in journalism, broadcast journalism with a concentration in political science. And when I graduated from there, I came here to Washington, interned at the White House in the communications shop for 5 or 6 months, then moved back to Chicago and started my career in media, which was producing a radio show in Chicago, hosting a weekend show on a news talk station in Chicago, and then writing for free for National Review Online. And I had made some of those connections over the course of my career as an intern. I interned at Fox. I got to know certain people. And I've had some high-ranking folks at Fox and other places be very generous to me and help me along the way. And I think a lot of the fact that I've been able to obtain a platform that I have at this point in my life is attributable in large measure to the kindness and help and support of other people.
Interesting. In terms of just some background, because we all think we know about media because we watch television,
right.
We listen to the radio, but most of us have no background, including me, in terms of how it works. Do you have to work long hours? Do you do a lot of work in understanding the issues? How do you go about, what's your workday look like?
Right. So my position is an interesting hybrid where I have multiple different jobs. So you mentioned the radio show, which is a 2-hour national show Monday through Friday across the country. I have a co-host who is a liberal Democrat. And so that's 2 hours a day, which is sort of unto itself a full-time job. But I'm also political editor at a website called townhall.com, which is a big right-leaning conservative site where I write usually 2 pieces every day, Monday through Friday. And then I do TV for Fox News as well, Fox News and Fox Business, which is, I would say, 3 to 5 times a week. Then I also speak on campuses and other places. So part of what I feel blessed about is I don't really have a typical work day, which I like. Every day sometimes feels a little bit different, but if I had to pick one, it would be getting up, checking email, checking Twitter, figuring out what the hell has happened, what the president has been up to in the early morning hours, sometimes watching our network, and then setting forth to read, talk to sources, that kind of thing, and then write for Town Hall for a number of hours. And then we have a show planning call, a prep call with our production team. Most of them are based up in New York every afternoon. And then I'm usually here in this studio by, at the latest, 5 p.m. for a 6:05 kickoff, although we will occasionally tape a segment here or there with various guests. And then sometimes, so for example, on last night's show, for half an hour of the radio show, I was a guest on the TV side on Brett Bayer's show, Special Report. So I left for 2 segments of radio to go do 2 segments of television, and Marie Harf, my co-host, who's an alumnus of the Obama administration, she ran the show, I'm sure, said all the liberal things that she wanted to say in my absence. And then I came back and did the next hour as well. So that gives you maybe a little bit more of a sense of trying to juggle the various roles. And fortunately, both Fox and Town Hall and the producers that I work with and my bosses have been very accommodating, and it's cool. It's never dull. It's always busy. Sometimes it feels like a lot, but that's okay.
So you start relatively early in the morning and you go quite a ways into the evening?
It depends on the day. I'm a night owl. So I will often be, you can talk to friends and others, that I will sometimes be on Twitter and on my phone reading longer form stories and that sort of thing later into the evening, or I'll stay up and finally unplug and watch Netflix or something to relax and get to bed pretty late. And then I'll sleep usually like 7 hours a night, but it's just on a different time frame. So most people are awake by the time I get up. Most people are asleep while I'm still awake.
Okay. So one of the interesting questions then is your radio show, you have a conservative host, i.e. you, and then you have a liberal host, i.e. Madam Harf. So how did you two get together? Like, how did that happen?
So she was for people who don't know Marie, she was the chief spokeswoman for the State Department under Secretary Kerry, President Obama. And she was also on the Obama campaign in 12. And so I was familiar with her work at the State Department just somewhat casually when they made news on the Iran deal or whatever it was. She was the public face of that a lot of the time. So I did not hold her views, at least, in the highest regard. We hired her after the 2016 election. That press release went out, and I've told this story on the air. She knows the story. I sort of said, okay, that's an interesting hire. We do need some more liberals around here. That'll be interesting. And we happened to cross paths for the first time in the green room here in D.C. We were doing different shows, and she...
Well, could you explain what the green room is for people who don't know what that is?
Sure. The green room is where guests go to sort of wait for their time. They'll go get their makeup, their hair done, that sort of thing. There's refreshments and...
adult beverages or others?
No.
Or no.
I don't think we technically allow booze in here. I've heard that there might be some around, but I have never seen it.
Okay.
So no water or soda and that sort of thing. So she came up and just started a conversation, said hello, could not have been nicer. And very quickly we learned that we were both Big Ten sports fans and both Big Ten graduates. So she's an Indiana University graduate, undergrad, but her true love is Ohio State, where both of her parents taught. And she grew up in Ohio, and she's a huge Buckeye, and I'm a Northwestern Wildcat. So we stood there in the green room for probably 20 minutes talking about the Big Ten. Yeah. And that's how we sort of hit it off and became friends. Eventually, the wheels started turning about a possible radio show, and we were talking about different ideas. And what about a right and left combination thing? Who are some of the younger liberals at the network that I get along with? And she, of course, came to mind. And here we are. We launched in May of last year.
Yeah. So one of the interesting questions in diversity and inclusion is how you treat people who are different than you. And in the technology business, this is a major concern, because we are literally the United Nations and people come from different aspects. So how do you as a conservative get along, or how do you manage the relationship with a confirmed liberal who you're both on different views of the political spectrum? So how do you go about making sure that relationship is positive and not negative and leading into the usual arguments, etc.?
Right. Especially when our job is to actually
cause arguments.
Right. So it's not that hard, because my father's side of the family is extremely liberal. And a lot of my friends definitely are on the political left. So the idea of it's this weird thing where we meet and talk to people who disagree, that has been my entire life. I think it's weird that that's considered weird, frankly. It shouldn't be weird. It should be normal. That is how pluralistic societies literally have to work. And then with Marie, look, I mean, when you are on the air 2 hours a day every day, there are going to be challenging times. So, the Kavanaugh hearings were really intense on the show. That was probably the toughest stretch that we've had, because we fundamentally were not seeing eye to eye on almost any aspect of that controversy, and it was tough. We got into a dust-up tonight on the shutdown and some votes and, some partisan stuff. But I think it's important not to take it personally and to recognize good points when you hear them and concede points sometimes when, not to fight just for the sake of fighting. and we really try to make it a point not to just do a 2-hour shout fest, because I think it would be bad for everyone's health, and especially as millennials, I think we didn't want to do that kind of a show. Doesn't mean that tempers won't flare occasionally or voices might be raised from time to time, but the general point of the show is to have these conversations, have really interesting guests on, talk about the issues in a smart way, and do it with common ground frequently cited and discussed.
So do you? So the one thing the first thing you said that was of interest is that you have to respect the other individual if they have different points of view, and that there's no ad hominem personal attacks. And how do you avoid that? Because that's always seems to be in our age of outrage, where everything is outrageous. That seems to be a growing problem.
I think you can attack arguments. Right, you can attack arguments, you can poke holes in things, you can point out hypocrisy, you try to stick to the arguments. And look, we know each other very well, so there'll be the occasional needle on this, that, or the other, but there's no, so what I think where we get into a lot of our problems when it comes to our discourse, and I'm not holding myself up as like the perfect exemplar of great discourse all the time, but I do think about it a lot. I wrote a book with another friend of mine, Mary Catherine Ham at CNN, called End of Discussion, which talks about our dysfunctional conversation. And one of the roots of the problem, I think, is when the disagreement is conceptualized or framed as the other person is not simply wrong, but they are bad. And they must believe what they believe for bad reasons. And I think when you enter a conversation or silo yourself off with people who only agree with you, when you enter that sort of encounter with the worst assumptions about the other side's motives or the other person's motives, then you're not going to be off to a very good start, and it's very unlikely you're going to end in a good place.
So if you start, what you're saying, I think if I understand it, if you're starting with bad arguments, whether it's on the left or the right from a political context, other things the same thing. If you start with bad arguments and to begin with, then you're off to the races to having a problem.
Or not even necessarily bad arguments, but a bad negative impression about why the other person believes what they do. Look, there are lousy, stupid arguments on the left and on the right.
So
right? There are bad people on the left and on the right. But I don't think the goodness or badness of the person should ever be dictated by where they reside on the political spectrum. I think that you can have strong disagreements. I think until proven otherwise, clearly proven otherwise, I think the working assumption ought to be that your political opponents, who are not enemies, want to make the country better, and you may disagree with how to get there, but everyone involved wants to make the country better. You just fundamentally can have disagreements of what that looks like, as opposed to your opponents are a bunch of people who want to ruin the country, or a bunch of people who are nasty bigots or whatever. I think when those are the starting points, you're not going to get anywhere.
You should judge people for who they are,
right,
and the content of their character.
Yeah, someone said that we were just thinking about this week.
Yeah, a couple of days ago. Yeah, so the content of your character matters, and that's what you're really saying, is that if you want to treat someone with respect, you have to start from a sound foundation rather than just guess automatically if they don't agree with you.
And there are people on the left, to that point, there are people on the left that I absolutely deeply respect, and there are people on the right that I don't respect at all. And that has to do with comportment and how you treat people and how you handle yourself and the types of arguments you make and how you make them and so on and so forth.
So that's on the political side, and so you also have expressed the fact that you're a Christian and that you're a gay man, and so the first question obviously is the fact that you're a gay man. How do you want to be treated, and how does the conservative community, that is your political persuasion, for lack of a better term, you represent the right on your radio show and on townhall.com. And and your guest hosts on Hewitt and other media concerns. So, how do you get treated as a conservative, and a gay person, because the common perception is that, well, conservatives don't like gay people, and you know, the other side does, and there's some preconceived notions that are stereotypic. So I'd like your view on that, and take as much time as you like, because this is an important issue in our technology space, where there's a certain amount of, on the engineering side in particular, where there's a lot of issues with dealing with this, and so it's a concern for our industry in particular. And you're very highly visible. Everyone knows who you are, and you're on the conservative side. Certainly, I've read your stuff on Town Hall, etc. So I'd like you to expound on that a little bit, if you could.
How I would like to be treated, or how I am treated?
How you would like to be treated, and what you think is respectful. And then how does the conservative community treat you as a gay person,
right,
relative to what the common perception is that people assume?
Sure. So I think the goal for me, and I think this is true of a lot of LGBTQ people, is to just be treated normally. Like, not to be treated, not to think about how we're treated, just to live our lives the way that we want to live our lives, be the people that we are, be judged on the content of our character and our work product and our friends and how we treat people and all of that. And who we happen to be attracted to or want to marry or what have you, be a non-issue and irrelevant. In terms of how I've gone about this, so, you know, I started coming to grips with my own sexuality a little bit after college, and then slowly but surely summoning the courage to tell people within my friend group and then within my family, and it's sort of a slow process over years. And one thing I wanted to make sure that at a certain point I was being honest and transparent with everyone who really mattered in my life, but I did not feel an obligation to tell the broader audience, you know, in my industry,
no pun intended, yeah,
about this, because I felt like it shouldn't be relevant. I wanted people to like me or dislike me based on my ideas, and I wanted to make sure that my career was neither hampered nor helped by my sexuality. I thought it shouldn't matter. Earlier on, I think it was definitely, I was like, okay, this could hurt my career. And then I started to realize at a certain point, maybe actually this could help my career, but I didn't want to pigeonhole myself as the gay conservative. So I waited for really as long as I could to develop a reputation independent of that. And then I wrote the book that I mentioned, End of Discussion, where Mary Catherine and I, in one of the chapters, get into gay rights and religious liberties and the discussions around those issues, which are often terrible. And I felt, okay, if I'm publishing 10,000 words.
This is the famous footnote.
Right. Yes. 10,000 words on this subject, I need to disclose. It's just journalistically. I felt like that was a relevant piece of information to give the audience. And also, not doing so, I think, would be like waving a red flag in front of someone to do it for me. And I wanted to do that on my own terms. So put it literally in a footnote in the book.
That's an interesting way of doing that. So was there a rationale behind it?
Yeah, I was struggling with how to do it, and Mary Catherine's like, why don't you literally make it a footnote? And I was like, that is actually genius, because that's exactly, I think it was symbolic in its own way. And I think the way that I opened the footnote was just saying, because it's written jointly, the book.
Yes.
So I just said, guy here, so I'm gay. And then sort of moved on from that point. And then we realized, prior to the book coming out, this was 2015, we had a new edition that came out last year, or late 2017, that added Trump to the whole mix of things, the paperback edition, which people should get at endofdiscussion.com.
This is the Hugh Hewitt doctrine. I think you have to mention the book 10 times or 5
yes,
times.
he's trained me very well.
Yeah.
He's a mentor, and this is one lesson I've learned, endofdiscussion.com.
If you go on the radio, you're supposed to, if you're an author, Hugh Hewitt believes you should mention the book 10 times before your segment is finished.
Right, and the name of that book again is End of Discussion. Anyway, so we realized, because we'd never put a book out before, that we were new to all of this, and we realized, oh wait, the media is going to get advanced copies of this book, and this is going to become a story. Someone's going to read the book, see the footnote, and it's Fox News conservative comes out as. So we did some advanced planning of how we wanted to do that, and we just decided I would do one interview, a print interview, ended up being with BuzzFeed. They've been in the news recently, but their sort of LGBT correspondent, who I had been assured by some friends was a fair guy, and I thought he treated me very fairly. That piece came out, I believe, on a Monday morning, 9 a.m. I remember tweeting that piece. I think I just tweeted BTW, by the way, and then the link. And then that night, I was on Megyn Kelly's show at the time at Fox News, The Kelly File. I had approached her months earlier and explained the situation. I said, I would like to do this. I'm going to do one televised interview about it and just sort of be over with. And I trusted her, and she was very good to me. I'll leave it at that in terms of all the details, but I did her show that night. By far the most nervous I've ever been on television, hands down. And that was, 9 a.m. and then 9 p.m. and my social media sort of went crazy, and that was that. So I of course get questions about it. I don't talk about it all the time. That's, the issues that animate me have not always been gay rights issues. When I feel like I want to weigh in on something, of course I will. But I didn't want to just sort of wave that flag and change my entire persona. I think, who people got to know, whether personally as friends or my audience, I am that guy just happened to be into dudes, right? That's it. So how I've been treated has been, I would say, overwhelmingly positive, overwhelmingly supportive. I like ambivalence. My favorite thing is ambivalence. Yeah, we know, don't care. Next. But it's always nice to hear from people who are being supportive. There, of course, has been negativity, some from certain elements on the right. I was not a Trump supporter, and so his supporters are very dogged, and I don't know if it was necessarily actual homophobia or take the Trumpy tactic of grabbing the easiest club and just clobbering someone with it. So most of the right-leaning negativity I got was from Trump supporters just using that because they were mad at me for not supporting Trump. If I had been a Trump-supporting gay person, totally fine. So in some ways they were treating me equally, although nastily, if that makes any sense.
They treated everybody nastily is what you're saying.
Some of them, right?
Yeah.
Not all of them, of course, but some of the hardcore folks. And there were a handful of religious conservatives. A few people had petitions to get me fired from jobs and that sort of thing, and that went absolutely nowhere at any of my employers. And then I did get a fair amount of ugly backlash from the left, particularly the gay left, who did the whole "you're a traitor."
Why would you have ugly backlash from that? What was the
because I'm a conservative.
Oh, I see.
Right. So I'm self-loathing. I'm like a Jew who supported the Nazis. I've heard it all, and I just find that all very boring and stupid. And most of the left has not gone that direction. Most of the gay left has not gone that direction. But there have been these fringes, and the irony that I point out sometimes is the fringe right and the fringe left come together to make the same argument, which is I can't really be in good standing both of these things, which I think is manifestly false. But it's interesting that they unite in this conviction that they try to foist upon me, and I just
the far extremes of both sides unite in their ideology, which is
you're not really one of us if you're that.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, I am, and if being one of you requires me to be different, then I'm not going to really identify as one of you. I'll just happily be both of these things on my own terms and move forward. And if you don't like it, that's your right.
And so you don't feel that that's, it's interesting because the assumption would be in the normal course that would cause you a lot of problems because of work and other things, because you're not just a conservative, you're a public conservative figure that is widely known. So that hasn't had any impact whatsoever.
No, I mean, again, you'll hear occasionally things, so I'll occasionally come out and make a comment on something to do with gay rights, and that's usually when there's more scrutiny, and the gay lefty blogs will write nasty things about me, and I'll get some tweets about, you're going to hell, and those types of things, and I am used to that. That is a sort of quasi-daily occurrence for me. But
being told that you're one thing or another because you're a conservative, or because
both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah, that's every day.
Yeah.
but I don't think it's representative of where most people are in this country, the vast majority, right? So it's easy to focus on the negative stuff, but like mostly those are trolls and unhappy people. And when occasionally I will clap back, I enjoy occasionally blowing someone up on Twitter just as a cathartic thing in either direction, right? But mostly you just have to ignore it and focus on the stuff that you want to focus on, or you do nothing else except worrying about critics, and that's, what an awful existence that would be.
Another interesting question is, and this is a little bit off topic, but not really. So Silicon Valley, and we're representatives of that. We're in Austin and in Washington and Toronto, but we work in the industry, the technology space. We do artificial intelligence and very high-end software for that. And so one of the interesting questions is, as a conservative media figure, you would not agree with most of the voting patterns in our industry, and so
I would not.
Yeah, and so do you? What is your impression of the not necessarily the bias, but the reputed bias in the Silicon Valley companies that are media centric, Facebook, et cetera? Like, how do you view that as a political and societal issue?
I think it's a worrisome thing. I think it's a worrisome thing because you look at some of the issues Google has had with the James Damore firing.
Could you explain who he is?
Yeah, it's this engineer who wrote this internal document in an area where they're supposed to offer internal critiques, where he said some things that were deemed by some to be anti-woman or politically incorrect, and he was criticizing, among other things, the insularity of the political culture, to which Google responded, "How dare you, we're not insular, you're fired." But there were a lot of Google employees who came out anonymously then saying, this is a problem here. I've done a few interviews with Jack Dorsey, who's the CEO of Twitter, and he said, candidly, we have gotten feedback that there are people on the center right who work for us who do not feel safe or comfortable expressing what they actually believe because they're worried what their colleagues would say or do to them. I think what's worrisome is when you have these companies with so much power and huge platforms over they are sort of the 21st century public square in a lot of ways. When they are so overwhelmingly dominated in one direction, I don't think that's a healthy thing. There are a lot of
Well, can I ask a question on that?
Let me just make one more point because I just want to not forget this one. A lot of CEOs, and not just tech, like corporate America, we need to look like America. Okay, the diversity credo, and I think there's value in diversity for sure. Part of that diversity has to be: are we remotely thinking like America? And if we are 95% not, there are going to be explicit or implicit manifestations of bias that are going to catch people's attention. And when you've got the Republican Party, for example, which generally is the non-regulation party, looking at new regulations for the tech industry because of this problem, that's an issue. I'm not sure I'm a fan of the regulatory government micromanagement, but I do share the concerns that I hear about from a lot of conservatives that the ideological deck is stacked against us in a way that is frightening sometimes.
So what I was going to interject was...
Sure, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's no problem. You were speaking, so it's my apologies. So the perception on the conservative side is that there is a bias.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, unanimity. Yeah. Like, you're not going to find... I mean, even the conservatives that they hire as tokens at these companies to try to liaise, or whatever terms they want to say, they will all be like, yeah, there's like 4 of us here. Grateful to be here, amazing place, brilliant people, pay isn't bad, but like it is hostile, and I do not always I've talked to these folks.
Do you in terms of your radio show and other activities, do you regularly interact with people from our industry who voice concerns to you, or is this a perception how did you because this is a very important issue for us in the industry and also for our society at large.
Right.
So how do you come about this view, because a lot of people don't get a chance to talk to people like you.
Well, I've spoken with friends in the industry. Maria and I did a week of the show, the radio show from Stanford this past fall, and we visited, during our stay, we visited Facebook and Twitter headquarters and met with folks, and we ended up doing interviews with people from both of those platforms. And then, look, I mean, I don't feel like the onus is on us to prove that it's a problem when I have the CEO of Twitter telling me openly that it is a problem, and he knows it. He came, Dorsey and a few of his team came here to D.C., and it was an off-the-record dinner, but I asked, can I talk that it exists? Can I say that it existed, that this happened? They said yes, so I tweeted about it. Sort of a group of center-right people, we all went out to dinner with him and his team. Every person on the team were decidedly left of center, and we had a good, frank discussion. I tweeted about it, and most of the tweet responses that I saw were attacking Jack from the left, saying, why are you talking to these people? And one of the other executives that I spoke to said when they announced to some of their team that they were doing this dinner with center-right people, there was alarm that their corporate leaders were going to be meeting with fascists. That is crazy town. I'm a lot of things, but if you've got a problem with me, that's a stretch, I think, on the spectrum here. And I think that goes to our original topic, which is, if we're unable to make important distinctions and shades of gray on people's ideologies and say anyone who is one step to the right of what I view as the center, they are bad, bigoted, fascist people, and the goal should be destroying them, destroying their beliefs, and taking as much power away from them as possible because they're bad. I don't think that's a healthy starting point. And it's not just the left that does this, obviously. I think this is a particularly tribalistic moment in our politics, and it is a very serious scourge on both ends of the spectrum.
If you, as a conservative, criticize conservatives, or if your co-host criticizes liberals, do you sense that you get a backlash out of context with what should be accepted as part of the problem?
I mean, so I am frequently critical of the president, and I hear about it immediately, right, on my Twitter mentions and that sort of thing, because I think part of what we're doing with Obama and Trump, there's like this cult of personality thing where it's like you are either loyal or disloyal. And for me, I was not a Trump supporter in the election. I was open about that. I was certainly not a Hillary supporter. I was not going to vote for her. But he's the president. So what I try to do is, when he's doing the right thing, I say it, and I defend him and I applaud him, and I'm a shill for Trump. And then when he's doing the wrong thing, I say it, and I'm, a never Trump, negative, pathetic, sniveling, irrelevant, blah, blah, blah. So,
the Antichrist. Yeah, yes.
Whatever, I just try to call him like I see him, while also putting my cards on the table about where I come at. I don't pretend to be a perfectly unbiased journalist, right? I'm not going to get my byline in a news story on the front page of a newspaper saying, I'm just a reporter. No, like I'm a journalist. I'm trained as a journalist. I'm an opinion journalist. And I think, at least for me, my attitude is, hey, audience, here's a sense of where I am. I'm a conservative on most of these issues. I'm not so conservative on some of these issues. I try to be intellectually honest. There's all the information, and you can sort of do with it what you will when you want to assess my credibility or the points that I'm making.
We're in the intellectual property business, and effectively so are you. And one of the things that is important for us is to be consistent and generate a product of the highest quality, even though you can't really see it. It's not a computer, it's software, it's intellectual property, it's artificial intelligence. What was your impression of the whole BuzzFeed cause célèbre, for lack of a better term, over the past 10 days? You went to one of the highest quality, most respected schools of journalism at Northwestern. So how do you go about differentiating, how you go about qualifying a story as something that should be? Because this is one of the issues of respect. If you don't like the other side of whatever, whether it's racial or gender or political, it's easy to do. If this is true, off we go. And so, how do you?
Sure.
You're in a great position to opine on this. So I'm very interested.
Well, it was sort of surreal. So the story broke on last Thursday night, and I happened to be on our 11 p.m. TV show on the news channel, Shannon Bream's show, Fox News at Night, when this was all breaking. So they tossed out our planned topic, and they had us react. So I had read the story. I did put some of my journalism hat on there, and I was thinking, like, okay, if this is true, this is, catastrophic for the president. I think, like, this would be impeachable stuff. But the sourcing here seems weird. They're saying that they have this evidence, but there's no actual quoting of the evidence. Have they seen the evidence? Who are these two anonymous sources? So I went on the air that night, and I said, if this turns out to be true, it is a huge, enormous problem for the president, but we should proceed with caution for these reasons. And also, there have been other Russia-related bombshells that have turned out to be less bombshelly under some more scrutiny of 24, 48 hours. I said, let's just take a breath and see where this goes. Are other people able to confirm this information? That kind of thing. So then the next day, we did an hour on it on our show on the radio.
But did it warrant spending that much time? That's the issue. It doesn't matter whether it's about the president. It's more important in terms of how do you go about in our internet age where everything is instant, how do you go about putting the brakes on a little bit and saying, well, we have to spend some time?
So talking about it. So I tweeted about it. I was on Thursday night. We talked about it on the show. I gave all of what's nice sometimes about radio is I had an hour with Marie to sort of go through and say, if this is true based on these things that they're reporting, it's hugely problematic, and here's why. However, here are my concerns that I have about this story, which is why I'm urging people to pump the brakes on this. Let's wait and see. We don't have any actual evidence, and I ran through, there's contradictions already between the two journalists. They went on TV the next morning. They couldn't agree on whether they had seen the evidence. That was a big red flag. So I sort of, hit on that point a number of times. So then, during our radio show, at the tail end of it, we did a television segment together on Fox News Channel, and in the middle of our segment, the news broke that Mueller had denied the story, which was an extraordinary development. So we reacted again in real time to this big turn of events, and I went back and I read what I wrote at Town Hall. I wrote a piece at Town Hall that morning about everything, and I was like, I think this actually held up pretty well. The proceed with caution, let's wait 24 hours. That whole thing kind of felt right. I also didn't want to ignore the story, because you can't, we're not in a media age where you can ignore a story.
I guess that's the real issue in our modern times, in quotation marks, is you can't, can you ignore this? It doesn't seem like you can. So the if this is true thing is gonna plague us on an ongoing basis.
True, although I think you can sort of establish some parameters of credibility. Who's the journalist? How have they done? What's their track record in the past? What is the sourcing? What is the nature of the sourcing? You can sort of take each story as it comes. Needless to say, this was very damaging to BuzzFeed's reputation, I think. The fact that they've doubled down on it is beyond me. And so, yeah, I mean, it is not a situation, I feel like, given my job description, where a massive, massive story can break, and I can simply decline to comment on it for 24 hours. It's just not realistic. It's not realistic for what I do, so I try to be careful about how I do that, and sometimes I succeed, sometimes I'm less successful.
Do you think that the media in general tries enough, or is there do we have to go to Amazon type ratings where we rate every journalist on 3 or 4 criteria? You get 4 stars for integrity, 2 stars for whatever.
Yeah, I think individuals sometimes matter more than
that's what
the publication and the source. People are like, oh, the New York Times, right? Totally failing, so bad. And then it's like, oh well, Fox News. We're like faux news. Like, yeah, we've heard all the things. Like,
do you have a T-shirt, faux news at all, or no?
I don't, because like Brett Baer, who's on 6 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, we saw him leaving.
Outstanding journalist, right? He's one of the best in the business. Chris Watt. We've got some amazing journalists here. We also have opinion people who are controversial and provocative, and they're not the same show. They do different kinds of shows. And to say like, oh, well, I don't like Tucker Carlson, what he has to say, I don't like Sean Hannity, all of Fox News is therefore discredited. Whatever their polling that they do with a bipartisan firm, if it's a Fox News poll, we don't like it, it's because it's Fox News. Or Fox News will have a scoop from one of our intelligence correspondents, and it's, you don't like it, well, it's Fox News, so we can dismiss it. And the conservatives do this all the time. Why do you believe anything you read in the Washington Post or what have you? I do think that overall, by and large, this mainstream media constellation is liberal to begin with. They generally are a bunch of
Is that
liberals.
emanate from the high quality journalism schools, or how does that? Why is that so? I mean, is there a reason?
Maybe the type of personality that the industry attracts. I don't know, but I would be willing to bet that of the Washington press corps, less than 15% of them voted for Donald Trump, and that might be generous. In a country where 46% of the country voted for Donald Trump, there's an imbalance. I think that particularly on social issues, the national press is overwhelmingly pro-gay marriage, overwhelmingly pro-choice on abortion, overwhelmingly socially liberal. And I think that gun control, I mean, I think that there are some issues on which they cannot help themselves. And then with Donald Trump, more than any figure I've seen, I do think there is such an animus towards him. Whether you think it's justified or not, the job of journalists is to try to seek the truth without an agenda, if that's how you're presenting your journalism. And I do think there is sometimes a rush to believe bad things about Donald Trump, and it leads to shortcuts and mistakes that he then exploits and says, aha.
Very effectively.
Yep, the sloppiness and the bias leads to fake news, and you take the examples where the excesses happen, and he uses that as the broad brush, and they play into his hands sometimes. So it's weird. They hate each other, and they attack each other all the time, but they sort of love each other and can't live without each other, and use each other for amplification and ratings and all the things. It's this bizarre relationship that we have with him.
How does the media as an industry, left and right, gay and straight, etc., how do you all get along with your colleagues who aren't of the same persuasion on a number of fronts? Like, do you all get along reasonably well, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. You go into any industry, and I hate to tell you this, but there are some egos in the media. And
that is a surprise. Yeah.
And sometimes when there's an ego-heavy industry, there are going to be people who loathe each other that you might assume love each other because they agree on. You'd think they would they cut from the same cloth, and then they just hate each other for all sorts of personal, silly reasons. And I'm not speaking about Fox News. I'm just talking about generally in the industry that this is what you can see sometimes. So yeah, I mean, I try to stay out of as much of the drama as I possibly can and just do a good job.
Good. Well, thank you very much, because I think you have some media responsibilities you have to go on television. So,
yeah, the book. Yeah, thank you for the reminder. End of Discussion is the book. Benson and Harf is the radio show. Town Hall.
What was the name of that book again? I didn't quite.
End of Discussion. I tweet about it sometimes at Guy P. Benson, which is another way to follow what I'm up to.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's been incredibly interesting, and we really wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thank you. This was really fun. Thanks for your good questions.
Thank you.